Hello, this is Brian Otten of Apologetics315. Today's interview is with Dr. Alistair Noble, Director of the Center for Intelligent Design in the UK. The purpose of this interview today is to find out a bit more about Dr. Noble's work with the Center for Intelligent Design, as well as explore some of the key ideas surrounding intelligent design. Thanks for joining me today, Dr. Noble.
It's a pleasure.
Now, first, could you tell me a bit about your background and how did you come to be involved with the Center for Intelligent Design in the UK?
Well, my long background is that I studied chemistry at university and did research in chemistry. Then I taught chemistry for most of my career. Most of my professional work was done in secondary education here in Scotland, and I was eventually an inspector of schools and finally working as an assistant director of education. That's my general background. My interest and passion has always been chemistry, and because I studied chemistry in the 60s and did actually attend a lecture at a university when Jim Watson, who was one of the co-discoverers of the structure of DNA, gave a lecture. I've always been fascinated by the chemistry of life and what underpins it. Now, alongside that, of course, I have been a Christian for most of my life, and I was always curious as to why the scientists were so sure that they had dispensed with Christian belief, and particularly in the area of origins. I found the consensus unconvincing. I just found it as an organic synthetic chemist who struggled often to make the simplest of molecules. I always found it puzzling that the most complex of molecules could somehow make themselves without any help in the primordial soup. I never found any of that convincing. And even apart from religious considerations, I just didn't find the neo-Darwinian story at all convincing. And I suppose I lived with that tension for most of my life, but within the last 10 years, there are two people that crossed my path. One of them was Philip Johnson, the author of Darwin on Trial. I heard him give a series of lectures here in the UK. In fact, I was involved in organising them in Scotland. We had a lecture in Glasgow, one in Edinburgh. About 1,000 people turned up at each, and I realised that people more than me were interested in this. I was very impressed by his devastating critique of neo-Darwinism and of materialism. But I think the really significant moment that got me into this was listening to a lecture from Stephen Meyer, who was giving a lecture in Cambridge on the information content of DNA. And thrilled as I was to hear Jim Watson describe the chemical structure of DNA, I think when I listened to Stephen Meyer, I listened to something even more impressive, which is that beyond the chemical structure of DNA, there is the digitally coded information that makes each of us who we are, the genetic information carried in the 6 feet of DNA in 100 trillion cells in our bodies. It was when I saw the information, real information, I saw immediately the argument that this really, the best explanation for this is that it is the reflection of an intelligent mind. And what I saw was not trying to fill a gap in science with a religious proposition. What I saw was that the science was presenting real evidence of intelligent causation that to my mind is indisputable. And in so much as one lecture can really change your mind and change the direction of your thinking, that was the lecture for me that did it. And of course I've become part of a network of, I guess, maybe up to 100 people around the UK who have varying degrees of commitment to this, and a small core group of us who really sensed that intelligent design has stumbled on something in science that is vitally important, that ought to be explored and ought to be promoted as a scientific proposition. So I think that's how I got into this.
Well, that's great. Now, we have the Center for Intelligent Design in the UK. Could you talk about that organization, how long it's been around, and what the purpose of the organization is?
Yeah, well, it would be easy, I think, to overstate our organization. We're a fledgling organization, and in fact, there's a group of about possibly around 10 to 12 of us who are most closely associated with this. We felt that to promote our purpose, which is the academic and public debate of intelligent design, we needed to have some degree of organization. And so we've got at the moment just a minimal organization. Our centre is not much more than a modest office in Glasgow from which we do some of our work. But the centre really is this group of people who are working together to promote a range of activities which we plan to give increasing visibility to intelligent design. Now, the most obvious of these was the visit of Michael Behe last year. We had Michael Behe in 6 or 7 centres around the UK. We had about 3,000 people attend his half dozen or so lectures. We're building up an email base among people who attended. We're planning in this coming year to have a number of events, a summer school, a conference, and towards the end of the year, an inaugural lecture in London. So we're simply building up. And because we're at the beginning of this, we are simply increasing the level of organization to cope with what we are doing, and we will expand it as we progress, and not to put too fine a point on it, as we get increasing financial support to do the kind of things we want to do. Our purpose, though, is very clear. We want to give visibility to the argument of intelligent design, which we believe is an argument rooted in science, not an argument rooted in religion, but an argument rooted in science. And while there is a sense in which intelligent design is a new idea, it is actually as old as science itself, because it is primarily the idea that gave rise to science in the first place, that we are exploring a universe that is designed. I think what is exciting about the modern manifestation of it, or if you like, the re-emergence of intelligent design, is that it has picked up at a molecular level very strong evidence of intelligent mind that requires to be explained in scientific terms. And I think that's what excites us about this. And we just feel in the interests of public awareness, in the interests of academic freedom, this is an argument that needs to be heard. And I guess we are saying this argument should be heard alongside the other arguments, because that is what rational debate is about.
Yes. Well, in a nutshell, intelligent design theory is simply this. The theory of intelligent design argues that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by intelligent causation. And you would argue that the scientific case for design is becoming increasingly visible and influential around the world. So my question would be, how has intelligent design theory been received in the UK? Do you find the idea a welcome one, or is it frowned upon?
Well, it's manifestly not a welcome idea, certainly in academic circles. There have been some surveys done recently in Britain, one by the BBC, I think, in 2005, and more recently by Theos, the think tank in London. And there's actually quite a high degree of public acceptance of intelligent design. In fact, it rises to the level of about 60+% of people would find intelligent design in some form as a credible explanation of origins. It's interesting that the figures for evolution, and I know you've always got to qualify that by what people understand by the question, but the level of acceptance of evolution is at the moment below 40%, down about the mid-30s. So the public acceptance of intelligent design, I think, is fairly high, and I'm not surprised at that, because it is an idea that is intuitive. I mean, most people understand that everything around them almost everything's designed. In fact, one of the challenges of life is to find things that are not designed. So people intuitively understand design. And therefore, when they look at the universe, whether they're thinking about the stars, the cosmos, the Milky Way, or living things, or the beauty of nature, it's an intuitive idea that that's designed. You know, you've really got to work hard to be persuaded that it's not designed. So I'm not surprised that the general public would have a sympathy for this. Well, what is very perplexing, though, is that the academic community almost entirely would reject it. Now, one of the things I'd like to know is what the level of acceptance in academia is, and I think it's higher than would be admitted. In fact, there's not much evidence of this, but my guess is that 10 to 20% of scientists would probably be sympathetic to the design hypothesis. But, and this is a really worrying thing, it is very dangerous in professional terms within academia to put your head above the parapet and give this point of view any credibility or any visibility. I am disturbed that in a country that values freedom, that there is such a level of intellectual fascism, particularly in the science faculties of our universities, where to mention the idea of intelligent causation is to do yourself significant professional damage and possibly even end your career. Now, there has to be something very strange about that for an idea that at the very least deserves to be debated, and most people would say is essentially an intuitive idea. And you know the famous Dawkins statement, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of design. Mm-hmm. And people will say, biologists will say, you've got to remember, although it looks designed, it's not designed. It only has the appearance of design. My question would be, how do you know it's only the appearance of design? If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, why is it not a duck? And, there is so to answer your question, no, the level of acceptance in academia is not high. And those of us that try to put our heads above the parapet for this are roundly derided and would be frequently dismissed as not credible scientists at all, and not worthy of being taken seriously. I think that will change, but it may take a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me throw out a few of what I see are the common dismissive statements that you might hear against intelligent design, and then I'll allow you to respond to them. For instance, you'll hear things like, this is just William Paley's watchmaker argument, and it's just been updated for the 21st century, but it's already been answered by Darwin, or they'll say things like that. What is your response? Is this a defeated old argument with new clothes?
Well, yes. Well, I think in the case of Paley, I think you have to distinguish between analogy and actuality. Mm-hmm. And the argument from intelligent design is not a William Paley type argument. William Paley is using an analogy from a watch to a cosmic watchmaker. Now, I happen to think that William Paley's argument is a legitimate and reasonable argument, and analogies do illustrate things. But the important thing about intelligent design is that this is not an argument from analogy. If we take what we were talking about a moment or two ago, if we take the information, the digitally coded information in DNA, there's no analogy there. It is actually there. I mean, almost everybody knows that DNA carries genetic information. Now, it's very hard to define what information is. It's a kind of material construct based on some mental process. But we all know what information is, even when we find it a bit hard to put into words. We know that print is information that comes from mind. We know that electronic information comes from intelligent mind. And we know that the information is actually there in DNA. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be here, because the genetic code that makes us unique individuals is actually there, encoded in the base pairs of DNA. So there's no gaps here, and there's no analogy here. You're looking at an actuality, and therefore it's different from the Paley argument, very substantially different. If you want an analogy about information, the thing that Bill Gates said some time ago was that the information carried in DNA is more sophisticated than his software. Now, that's not really an analogy. That's a comparison. But he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about digitally coded information, in one case on computers, and in the case of life, on the spine of DNA. So it's not a Paley argument. It is an argument from actuality. And I suppose, we're kind of privileged to live in an age that has been able to unravel molecular chemistry to the extent where we can see it. And I do get frustrated when people say, well, this is just about filling the gaps with God. Well, it isn't actually. It's about facing the reality of what's there and asking what is a very legitimate question, which is, where did that come from? If you look at the chemistry of DNA, it's a legitimate question for scientists to say, how would that have assembled itself chemically? How would those chemicals have assembled in that way? An information scientist, or even a chemist like me, would say, but it's not just the chemistry, it's the information. Where would that information come from? Now, that's a scientific question. And the only way that you can answer that question is by the method which Darwin himself used, looking back to the beginning of time, which is inference to the best explanation. You have to consider what possible explanations there are for the origin of information. And to be legitimate, you've got to say, well, I need an explanation that is known to work elsewhere. And when it comes to functional information, the only known source of functional information is intelligent mind, whether it's the mind of a writer or a journalist or a software programmer. That's known to produce information, and there's no other way in which information is produced but by intelligent mind. Therefore, scientifically, to make the inference to the best explanation, which is that the information in DNA is the result of intelligent causation, is a thoroughly scientific position, and much better than the other explanation, which is, well, we don't know, which is what Professor Dawkins and others will say, well, we don't know, but give us time and we'll think of something. Well, actually, you've got an explanation that's known to work everywhere else, so why wouldn't it work here? And that's why I think that intelligent design is a powerful, credible, legitimate scientific argument.
Well, that's good. You mentioned there just a moment ago about many people would try to say, no, it just appears designed, but it's not. And so the question I would have here is design something you can detect objectively? Some might say this is simply a subjective thing, as in it appears designed to me. But are there objective criteria for design detection, do you think?
Yes, well, yeah, of course there are. I mean, design is so obvious that people probably never think of this, but it's not difficult to detect things that are designed. I mean, look at buildings, look at motor cars, look at aeroplanes, look at picture frames, look at telephones. These things are all designed, and we know instinctively they're designed. But if you get into the science of design detection, and this kind of thing you would get, for example, in forensic chemistry and so on, where you're trying to work out how some artifact has appeared. When we're talking about design, we are talking about something that is, well, essentially highly improbable. It's not something which is just going to appear as a result of chance or necessity. It's highly improbable. And secondly, it is specified. It has a specificity. It conforms to a pattern somewhere else, or it performs a specific function. Now, I shave every morning with one of these sophisticated new fusion razors. If you take a razor and look at it, it's pretty obvious it's designed. You also know that it was not intended to strip wallpaper. It is there to cut hair from someone's face. Somewhere in the factory of Gillette, there will be a plan, there will be a drawing, there will be a series of engineering drawings as to how they arrived at this and how it is produced. So when I pick it up, I can see the evidence of design. I would never think, my goodness, look what the wind's blowing in through the window, or look how the bits and pieces in my bathroom have assembled themselves. You know it's designed, and you know that it conforms to a pattern, and it has a specific purpose. So these are the kind of elements, highly improbable, specificity. These are the elements of design detection. And it almost seems superfluous to describe these things. So when you look at, for example, as Michael Behe did, when he got into this, he looked at the structure of the bacterial flagellum, and he said, my goodness, that's an outboard motor. You immediately sense that you're looking at something that has been put together, which is highly improbable, and which is assembled in a particular way for a specific purpose. You instinctively sense that that's designed. One of the other ID theorists, Bill Dembski, would say that another way of looking at this is to look at the mathematics and the probability of things being put together. Some things can come together randomly, and you can put, I think the mathematical term is, you can put probability bounds on it. And when he starts to look at living systems and looks at the probability of them being assembled by chance or necessity, he finds that they lie well beyond the probability bound. So these are the elements of design detection, and for some reason or other, we do not seem to want to apply these principles to the living world. We somehow have convinced ourselves that this doesn't apply in that world, and that just seems peculiar to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've mentioned in responding to the common objections here, and I've just given two of them. You've offered so much, in my view, so much evidence for design. You've got all these mechanisms in the biological realm, but still people would say things like, well, ID is just creationism. They would accuse ID proponents of believing that God created the world and everything in the Bible, so they're just trying to put the scientific spin on it. Given the fact that there have been so many positive arguments for ID, why do you think that this objection still persists?
Well, I find that a perplexing and difficult question. I do think we live in a time when a whole generation of people have been brainwashed by materialism, by methodological naturalism. This came home to me recently when I was debating with some honest physics students at the University of Durham, who understood design detection, and we went through the whole thing about design detection in engineering and in the world around us. And then I said, now let's look at the bacterial flagellum. Oh, but that's different. That's biology. And I said, well, why is it different? Well, it just is different. And so I suppose one of the features of brainwashing is that people can't think out of the box. They can't see beyond what they have imbibed. And so I'm puzzled by this. I mean, I don't want to be unduly critical of people, but I really am puzzled that for some reason the arguments for design are just out of hand. And to say, well, this is just creationism, is simply just not to listen to what is being said. Intelligent design, whatever it is not creationism. Intelligent design, I suppose you could say, is a minimal commitment to intelligent causation based on the evidence from the natural and living worlds. That's what it is. Now, I don't happen to think there is anything wrong with holding a view that the world is created. I mean, I think philosophically it's the most logical position to take. And that's not the same thing as creationism, because creationism tends to be associated with a very particular interpretation of the early chapters of Genesis. But none of that is intelligent design, because intelligent design is not a theological construct. Intelligent design is an inference from empirical data. And I don't know how much more clearly you can say that. Because it's put forward as a scientific proposition, it is in that sense tentative. We should listen to the arguments of those who come up and say, well, there is evidence for no design. But I don't hear evidence for no design. What I hear is assertions that there is no design and a rather bleak hope that someday we'll be able to explain it to you. So none of that seems very credible at all. And that's why I think intelligent design is a very powerful argument that will increasingly be seen to be a powerful argument. And not least because it chimes in with the intuitive and indeed the philosophical idea that to have a universe at all, there has to be some cause of it. So it is clearly allied to that idea, but it grows out of the actual data in front of us.
Now, looking at some of the evidence for intelligent design, we've mentioned a few different categories. Would you explain the different areas of the world where we see design, if you will, from the micro to the macro? Or
yeah, well, I think there are three areas where the evidence of design is indisputable, and a great deal of work has been done in this over the centuries, and particularly through the modern intelligent design movement. And these would be, I think, in ascending order of credibility, though I find them all credible. I think the existence of natural law and the fine-tuning of universal constants and forces, I think that is very impressive evidence of design. In fact, I'm intrigued that Richard Dawkins, Michael Shermer, and so on, who would deny the design argument, on a number of occasions say that they find if they were looking for an argument for design, that's where they would look. So, I mean, that is impressive, the fine-tuning of our universe, but the existence of natural law at all. I mean, you could say that natural law is information embedded in the cosmos. We've been talking about information in DNA, but the fact that the force of gravity operates, as far as we know, everywhere in the universe, the fact that that's somehow embedded in the universe, I mean, the mathematical equation is just a way of describing it, but there's something there which in a cosmic sense is informational, because mass has to react to it wherever it encounters it. So I think that's impressive, and that's evidence of intelligent causation. The next area I go to, and it's one I think in which the design becomes even more apparent, is the area of molecular machines and the chemical processes within living things. And I think this is the Michael Behe area where Michael Behe and others have looked at these hugely complex structures in nature. Now, they're not saying they're so complex that God must have made them. That's not what they're saying. They're saying these systems bear all the hallmark of design systems. They are so complicated and interconnected that it looks improbable that these just evolved by chance and necessity. These things look designed. Nobody disputes that. Therefore, a reasonable proposition is that they are designed. So that would be from molecular machines and living systems. The third area of argument, I think, is the area that got me into this, and for me this would be the most convincing of the three, and that is the information content of DNA. I think that is a knockout argument for materialism, because information is real. It's non-material, but it's real, and it's embedded in material systems, and it is only ever the product of intelligent minds. So I cannot, frankly, see a counter-argument to that. Even if science was able to increasingly explain how DNA assembled itself, and how it assembled itself in a very specific way to carry genetic information, even if that could be explained in terms of the chemical processes that got there, you still haven't explained the information bank that is encoded across the chemistry. You still haven't got to the heart of that problem, which is the source of the information. So fine-tuning, molecular machines, information and DNA, I think, are the three areas that have been most explored. I think there are two others. A fourth one is the whole area of origin of first life chemistry. I think the inability of modern science to give any credible explanation for how life first began, I think, points to the fact, and there's a lot more work to be done in this, but it is being done, that to get the first living cell, you really need to have design to get that. You just aren't going to get that by just the operation of natural law. And the fifth area, which is the one that we know very little about, is the nature of mind and consciousness. And that may prove to be the most convincing argument of all, because mind and brain is an incredible area to look at. It is obvious that on top of the brain chemistry, there is the phenomenon of consciousness, which requires an explanation. And I think you might come to the conclusion that there appears to be evidence there of an intelligent mind that has expressed itself in the mind of human beings. Now, that sounds a bit more philosophical, it even sounds a bit religious, but you've still got a scientific issue about what is the origin of consciousness and how does it play itself out on the chemistry of our brain. It's a bit like the difference between piano notes and the tune that's actually played. There's a conscious tune played out on the chemistry of our brain, the chemical notes of our brain, and I think that's an area. Now, one or two people have written about the design implications of that, but I think these are two areas, origin of first life chemistry and rational thought and consciousness, I think are areas for future design theorists.
Well, I find all of that just phenomenal, and when you just list them categorically like that, it's so powerful cumulatively, I think. At the same time, I hear echoing in my ears the dismissive, hand-waving caricatures or objections from some skeptics who might just hear everything you've just said and say something like, your argument is this, we don't know how it happened, so therefore God must have done it. And I find that quite frustrating, and I wonder what your thoughts are when you hear something like that.
Well, yeah, that is frustrating, and I'm trying hard not to say that, because what I'm trying to point to are things that are actually there for which there are known explanations. Let me just stick with the information in DNA. The information is there, and we know where information comes from. So what's the mystery? There's no real mystery about the argument there. It's not that we're saying we don't know how this came about, therefore it must have been God. Right. When I pick up a newspaper and look at the print in front of me, and I read the letters and I see it carries a message, I don't say, oh, I don't know how that ink and paper got together in that form, it must be God. I don't say that at all. In fact, I don't even think about it, but I know that the words that are there are the direct product of the mind of the journalist who wrote them. So, I mean, there's no mystery about that. And I can't understand how, when you apply the same argument to the same kind of information, because DNA is like a language, it's a genetic language, I can't see why the argument does not carry over. This is not proposing something wildly in the dark. It's a known phenomenon that intelligent mind produces credible information. So when people say, well, you're just pushing God into holes, I say, well, you're not listening to what I'm saying. Maybe you don't understand what I'm saying, because I think it's pretty clear. I think it's clear I'm not saying that.
You know, we talked about just a moment ago how some would say, oh, you're making your case on the basis of your underlying worldview of creationism, for instance. But do you think that that could be something that's going on with the objectors? And, for instance, having a underlying view of naturalism would be the real source behind many of these objections of this philosophical naturalism?
Well, I think that is the case. I mean, I wouldn't try and say that I'm not influenced by my worldview. I mean, that would be ridiculous, because all of us develop a worldview, and it's very hard to separate that from the way we think. But there is no doubt that people have adopted a worldview which is based on materialism. They have taken science to underpin their materialism, so that they've now got to the position where science does not allow anything other than a physical and material explanation, and they go the next step, which is to say, therefore, there can be no explanations that invoke anything beyond the material. Now, the illogicality of that is blindingly obvious, but that's the reality. I was listening to Professor Peter Atkins on Radio 4 this morning, asserting that science will eventually answer every question in the universe, and that there is nothing beyond the material. And the philosopher Mary Midgley was on the program, whom I wouldn't think was a supporter of intelligent design, but she described his position as absurd and lacking in any kind of philosophical strength. Indeed it is. It's a kind of half-boiled philosophiil position that our starting point is there can only be material explanations and nothing else can be considered. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, I think people bring a worldview to this. Now, I do think that intelligent design has very significant implications philosophically and indeed religiously. It doesn't compel theistic belief, but it is clearly consistent with it. Mm-hmm. And I think the moment you see design in nature and you sense that that's the direction the science points in, it immediately raises questions about the nature of the universe, about the nature of human existence, and I suppose also about the nature of my part in it. And that might even lead to people thinking about, if I'm part of this design, to what extent do I have accountability within it? So there's a whole range of uncomfortable philosophical implications that I think some people are reluctant to face. But that's not core intelligent design. The science of atomic theory was very exciting and then became very alarming when people discovered it could produce an atomic bomb. And the implications of the science were horrific, but you still had to face the evidence that energy is there, that atomic power is possible, nuclear reactions are possible. You've got to say, well, the science says it's possible, and we do need to face the implications. And intelligent design's a bit like that. You can't wish the implications away. They will follow from the hard evidence of design.
Well, this is very fascinating, Dr. Noble, and the whole topic, unfortunately, we don't have time to continue to explore right now, but I want to shift and ask you how people in the UK might be able to partner with the Center for ID in order to maybe bring events or resources their way.
Yeah, well, we have a website, and we call ourselves the Center for Intelligent Design. We use the acronym C4, that's the number 4, C4ID, and so you'll get us at www.c4id.org.uk. And if you go to that website, you'll find a range of material there, a range of information about us, a range of resources. We're just about to get into e-commerce on our website, so you'll be able to purchase things there. And you'll find email addresses there if you wish to contact us and be in touch. And one of the things that we would like people to do is to sign up on our website. You can register with us, and that would give us the opportunity to provide you with information about our activities. We're here for the long haul. We expect our intention is to work at this. We may find ourselves in a 10, 20, or even 50-year project. I won't be around that long. But this is something for the long haul. This is not a flash in the pan. If this is for real, then it will be around for a long time. And we would certainly like to hear from people who are interested in the arguments, even people who are skeptical of them but would be interested in pursuing it with a degree of intellectual honesty. We'd really like to hear from them.
Well, Dr. Noble, it's been fascinating, and I appreciate your time, so thanks for joining me today.
Okay, it's been a great pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Dr. Alistair Noble, Director of the Center for Intelligent Design in the UK. Find links for the Center for Intelligent Design at c4id.org.uk. And links to that website and other resources can be found at today's blog post at Apologetics315. I want to take a moment to thank those who are listeners to this podcast, and thanks for sharing it with others via Facebook, Twitter, and email. If you find these podcasts useful, please leave a positive review in iTunes, and let others know about the resources at Apologetics315. This is Brian Oughton of Apologetics315, and thanks for listening.